It's November 12, 1942, and in the city of Richmond, California, something extraordinary is about to unfold. A ship massive by any standard, 441 feet long and weighing over 28 million pounds, was ready to make its grand debut. But this wasn't your typical launch, not even close. This wasn't just another ship being built the old-fashioned way, like every other vessel in the past. This was the SS Robert E. Peary, and it was going to change everything you thought you knew about manufacturing. It wasn't just the size of the ship that was groundbreaking, it was the speed at which it was constructed. This ship, assembled in just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes, had taken the old ways of shipbuilding and tossed them out the window. For centuries, it took skilled shipwrights months to build a vessel of this size. Some ships even took up to a year to complete. But here, in a matter of days, a fully functional Liberty ship stood ready for service. And the craziest part? The workers who had put it together weren't seasoned shipbuilders at all. They weren't the experts or professionals you'd expect. No, they were regular people, former secretaries, farmers, housewives, laborers, who had learned the skill of welding only a few weeks earlier. And that's not the only thing that made this moment so extraordinary. Just think about this. How many times have you heard someone say something can't be done only for someone to prove them wrong? Well, that's exactly what happened here. When Henry J. Kaiser, a man with no shipbuilding experience whatsoever, stood up and promised to build these ships, many of the most respected maritime experts laughed him off as a dreamer, an outsider. But Kaiser didn't care about the traditional rules of shipbuilding. He saw an opportunity to change the game, and he did just that. Now I know what you're thinking. How could someone with no experience in this field even imagine creating something so revolutionary? Let me take you back to the beginning, back to when Henry Kaiser signed his first shipbuilding contract on December 27, 1940. At the time, Kaiser was already a renowned construction magnate, known for building massive dams and highways, but he had never even stepped foot in a shipyard before. Still, he boldly promised the United States Maritime Commission that he would build 30 ships in just 2 years. Imagine the reaction when the biggest shipyards in America heard this. They thought it was an insane, impossible challenge. And here's the real kicker. One of the oldest and most respected shipyards in America, Todd Bath Iron Works, agreed to partner with Kaiser, but only reluctantly. They figured that their expertise would help make up for Kaiser's complete lack of knowledge. But they couldn't have been more wrong. You see, it turns out that Kaiser's lack of experience wasn't a disadvantage. It was his greatest strength. He didn't carry the baggage of, "This is how we've always done it," so he wasn't bound by tradition. He didn't care about what the experts said couldn't be done. Instead, he focused on the problem at hand. How could we build more ships faster with less manpower? That question would soon set the stage for one of the most significant industrial revolutions in history. Before we go any further, though, think about this. What would you do if someone told you something was impossible, but you just knew you had the ability to prove them wrong? This is where it all starts to get interesting. Now, Kaiser wasn't doing this just for the sake of innovation. No, this wasn't some science experiment. This was wartime, and the world was facing unprecedented challenges. The Allies were losing the Battle of the Atlantic to German U-boats, and shipping losses were piling up faster than they could be replaced. In 1941 alone, the world would lose 3.6 million tons of merchant shipping. That's an enormous number when you consider that each Liberty ship was capable of carrying thousands of tons of cargo. Britain's ships were being sunk at an alarming rate, and they didn't have time to wait for the traditional shipbuilding methods to catch up. In a race against time, Kaiser's contract wasn't just a bold bet, it was a desperate necessity. They needed ships, and they needed them fast. Regular shipyards would take an average of 230 days to build a single cargo ship. At that rate, the war could have been lost before even a fraction of the ships needed to replenish Allied fleets could be built. The traditional shipbuilding approach, with its months of work, simply couldn't keep up. This is where the magic happened. After seeing the assembly lines at Ford Motor Company's car factories, Kaiser's chief engineer, Clay Bedford, had a revolutionary idea. Why not build ships like cars? What if instead of building a ship from keel to deck in a strict sequence, they could build multiple sections at the same time? What if they could create an assembly line for ships? The idea was simple yet radical. Instead of waiting for one part of the ship to be completed before moving on to the next, why not work on different sections simultaneously, and then bring them together at the end? It was a concept that sounded absurd to the traditional shipbuilders, but to Kaiser, it was the future. At this point, let me ask you a question. How many of you have been told that your ideas were crazy or impossible? We all know how frustrating that can feel, but imagine turning that frustration into fuel for your success. Kaiser didn't just hear the skepticism around him. He used it as motivation to prove everyone wrong. But there was another bold move that Kaiser made. Shipbuilding was traditionally done with rivets, metal pins hammered through steel plates to hold the ship's frame together. A highly skilled team of riveters could maybe install about 100 rivets in a day, but Kaiser had a different idea. What if they used electric arc welding instead of rivets? Now, welding wasn't new, but using it on such a massive scale was. It was risky. It was untested. In fact, the U.S. Maritime Commission, led by Vice Admiral Emory Land, thought it was downright foolish. They didn't trust that welding would hold up under the stresses of the ocean. But Kaiser didn't back down. He believed in it, and so he pushed forward. This was the turning point. Kaiser's vision wasn't about simply making a few small improvements. He wanted to transform the entire shipbuilding industry, to challenge what was thought to be possible. And here's the crazy thing. It worked. By the spring of 1942, his yards were producing ships at a pace that no one had ever imagined. And here's the kicker. These weren't just ships that looked good on paper. They were fully functional, ready to serve in wartime, and they were tough enough to survive the worst conditions. But as you might expect, not everyone was convinced. The skeptics didn't vanish overnight. But in just a short time, the world would witness an industrial miracle that would shake the very foundations of traditional manufacturing. At this point, you might be wondering, how could this be possible? How could a man with no shipbuilding experience change an entire industry so quickly? Well, that's the thing about innovation. It's not always about having all the answers before you start. Sometimes it's about being willing to ask the right questions and believe in something bigger than the obstacles in front of you. So, if you want to know how Kaiser's dream of mass-producing ships in record time actually came to life, and how it fundamentally changed the way the world would build ships for the next 100 years, stick around. This is just the beginning of a story about innovation, determination, and how one man's refusal to accept the impossible changed history forever. Before we get into the next chapter of this incredible journey, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. The story of how Henry Kaiser revolutionized shipbuilding is only getting started, and you're going to want to see how it all unfolds. Let's dive deeper into this transformation. It's a story that will not only change how you view industrial history, but could also change the way you approach challenges in your own life. Stick with me, and let's uncover how Kaiser's innovations reshaped the future. By the time the SS Robert E. Peary slid into the waters of San Francisco Bay on November 12, 1942, something much bigger was at play than just a single ship launch. This wasn't just a triumph for Henry Kaiser's shipyards. It was the beginning of an industrial revolution that would change the course of history. In those 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes, a new method of manufacturing was born, one that would set the standard for generations to come. But here's the thing. What made this achievement so remarkable wasn't the ship itself. It was the workers who built it. Remember, these weren't the seasoned shipbuilders, the men who'd spent their lives on the docks. These were everyday people. People just like you and me who had no prior knowledge of shipbuilding. They were given a 2-week crash course on welding, and then they were put to work building an entire ship. Can you imagine? People who had never welded a thing in their lives were now welding together one of the most complex and vital pieces of machinery for a world at war. It wasn't about expertise, it was about training, organization, and faith in the workers to do something remarkable. But here's the thing. What made this achievement so remarkable wasn't the ship itself. It was the workers who built it. Remember, these weren't the seasoned shipbuilders, the men who'd spent their lives on the docks. These were everyday people, people just like you and me who had no prior knowledge of shipbuilding. They were given a 2-week crash course on welding, and then they were put to work building an entire ship. Can you imagine? People who had never welded a thing in their lives were now welding together one of the most complex and vital pieces of machinery for a world at war. It wasn't about expertise, it was about training, organization, and faith in the workers to do something remarkable. And let's not forget, this wasn't a small team working around the clock for months to get the job done. No, over 1,000 workers, including women, minorities, and people from all walks of life, came together to assemble this ship. It was like the ultimate assembly line, just like the ones used in automobile factories. But instead of making cars, they were constructing vessels that would carry supplies to the front lines. This was about more than just speed. This was about necessity. As you're sitting here listening, you might wonder, how did they do it? And more importantly, how could they do it so quickly? Well, here's the secret. Kaiser wasn't afraid to throw out all the old rules and start fresh. He didn't care what the experts said about how long it took to build a ship. Instead of following the traditional route, where shipbuilding happened in a sequence, Kaiser realized he could break everything down into smaller, repeatable tasks. No longer did the workers need to follow a strict step-by-step process. Instead, they would work on different sections of the ship all at once. While one group welded the bow, another could work on the stern and yet another on the engine room. It was like a well-oiled machine, and it worked. And then came the game-changer, prefabrication. For years, shipbuilders had assembled ships from the keel up, working in a carefully controlled sequence, one piece at a time. But Kaiser flipped that on its head. Instead of building the ship in one big, long stretch, he decided to make it in parts in different places, all at once. Once the pieces were ready, they could be assembled in a fraction of the time it would have taken using the old method. This wasn't just faster, it was smarter. It was like taking a puzzle and putting all the pieces together at the same time, instead of building it piece by piece from the outside in. But this wasn't just about efficiency. It was about creating something out of nothing. You see, the Richmond shipyard where the SS Robert E. Peary was built didn't exist just a year earlier. In 1941, it was a vast stretch of empty mudflats, barely more than a wasteland. Kaiser's team of engineers and builders had to create the entire facility from scratch. And they did it with speed that would make your head spin. They built enormous cranes capable of lifting 150-ton steel sections. They laid out a factory floor that resembled something you might see in a car plant. And they constructed massive tracks to move the enormous pieces around. Traditional shipyards had big cranes and long docks, all designed to keep a shipbuilding process moving in one, uninterrupted sequence. But Kaiser's design wasn't about tradition. It was about doing what needed to be done and doing it fast. The Richmond shipyard was laid out like a factory, with prefabrication zones where parts were assembled and then moved along tracks to their final destination. It was a completely new way of thinking about shipbuilding, and it worked. But even with all these innovations, the challenge wasn't over. Building a ship this quickly was one thing, but could they actually make it to the end? Would the ships be seaworthy, or would they fall apart under the pressure? After all, they were breaking all the old rules, and surely some would argue that had to come with consequences. And yet, as it turned out, the SS Robert E. Peary wasn't just a showpiece. It was a fully functional operational ship ready for duty. In fact, after only 7 days, it was ready to be delivered. This was the moment where Kaiser's doubters had to start facing the music. For years, shipbuilding experts had scoffed at the idea of welding instead of riveting, of speeding up the process, of cutting corners in the name of efficiency. But now there it was, an actual ship built in record time, and it wasn't just built for show, it was built for real-world service. The SS Robert E. Peary wasn't a prototype or a test run. It was a fully operational vessel, capable of handling the harshest conditions the ocean could throw at it. This was the tipping point. This wasn't just a victory for Kaiser's shipyards. It was a victory for the future of manufacturing itself. The entire shipbuilding industry had been turned upside down, and there was no going back. What had once been considered impossible now seemed not only possible but inevitable. As Kaiser's methods started to show results, traditional shipyards across the country began to take notice. They sent their engineers to the Richmond shipyard to study what was happening there, and some of them even reluctantly adopted some of the techniques Kaiser had pioneered. But it wasn't just the shipyards that were watching. The U.S. government, military leaders, and other industries began to realize that what Kaiser had done wasn't just about shipbuilding. It was a blueprint for how to tackle massive production challenges in any industry. Think about it. In just a few months, Kaiser had proven that it was possible to build ships faster, cheaper, and with a largely untrained workforce. This wasn't just about ships. It was about rethinking the very foundations of industrial production. Every assumption about what was possible in manufacturing was now up for debate. And if Kaiser could do this with ships, what could he do with other industries? What could you do with your own challenges if you were willing to think outside the box and question what you were told could or couldn't be done? It's not just a story about ships. It's a story about overcoming limitations, about pushing through the impossible, and about realizing that when we come together, when we put our minds to something and trust in the system, there's no limit to what we can achieve. The construction of the SS Robert E. Peary was just the first chapter of a much larger transformation that was about to take place. One that would not only change shipbuilding forever, but would set the stage for industrial revolutions that would echo across decades. Now, before we dive into what happens next, let me ask you this. How often do you stop yourself from doing something because you think it's too big, too impossible? What if, just like Kaiser, you were willing to throw out the rulebook and ask, how can I make this work? If this story has sparked even a little curiosity inside of you, I'm going to ask you to take a moment and hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you won't want to miss the next part of this incredible story. What happens next will change the way you think about industry, innovation, and possibility. Let's dive deeper into the legacy that Kaiser created. The momentum was building. As more ships came off the production lines at Kaiser's shipyards, the world began to notice. It wasn't just the speed with which they were being built. It was the fact that they were functional, tough, and ready to serve. The SS Robert E. Peary wasn't a one-off success. It was a harbinger of what was to come. The untrained workers, who had only months before been strangers to the shipbuilding world, were now constructing ships at a pace that was breaking records left and right. But here's the thing. The speed wasn't the most important thing. The real revolution was in the very method of manufacturing that Kaiser had pioneered. Up until that point, shipbuilding had been seen as an art, a craft that took years to master. Shipyards across the world relied on skilled workers who had honed their craft over generations, but Kaiser turned that notion on its head. He proved that you didn't need to be a master shipbuilder to build a ship. What you needed was organization, efficiency, and a system that could break down complex tasks into simple, repeatable actions. That's exactly what Kaiser did, and in doing so, he revolutionized not just shipbuilding but manufacturing as a whole. Now let's talk numbers for a minute. When the shipyards first started out under Kaiser's approach, it took an average of 230 days to build a single Liberty ship. But by the time they hit their stride, that number dropped dramatically. Within just a year, they were building ships in 70 days. Then by mid-1942, the average construction time had fallen even further. These ships weren't just built fast. They were built well. And most importantly, they were built in a way that completely upended everything people thought they knew about manufacturing. The assembly line method, the prefabrication approach, these were game changers that extended far beyond shipyards. But here's where it gets even crazier. The competition among the Kaiser shipyards began to take on a life of its own. This wasn't just about meeting deadlines anymore, it was about breaking records. And Kaiser's workers, fueled by the belief that they could accomplish the impossible, began to race against each other to see who could build ships the fastest. This wasn't just a fun contest, it was an industrial arms race, and the stakes were high. But here's where it gets even crazier. The competition among the Kaiser shipyards began to take on a life of its own. This wasn't just about meeting deadlines anymore, it was about breaking records. And Kaiser's workers, fueled by the belief that they could accomplish the impossible, began to race against each other to see who could build ships the fastest. This wasn't just a fun contest. It was an industrial arms race, and the stakes were high. One yard in particular became the center of attention, the Portland Shipyard in Oregon. In September of 1942, the workers there constructed the Joseph N. Teal in just 10 days, a record that shattered everything that had come before it. The news spread like wildfire. People couldn't believe what they were hearing. How could a ship be built in just 10 days? Was it even possible to maintain quality at such a blistering pace? But the Portland yard proved it could be done. And the workers didn't stop there. Every day they pushed harder, faster, and further. But as with every great story, there had to be a moment of reckoning. While the competition had ignited incredible feats of production, it had also raised questions. Were they getting too caught up in the race? Was speed becoming the sole focus? Vice Admiral Emory Land, who had seen the results firsthand, was starting to get nervous. The shipyards were pushing boundaries, but were they doing so at the expense of the bigger picture? Would these ships be ready for battle, or were they being rushed out too quickly? That's when Clay Bedford, Kaiser's chief engineer, stepped up with a bold proposition. He suggested that they take things even further. Instead of simply trying to break records, why not aim to build a complete ship in less than 10 days? Bedford had been inspired by the fierce competition among the shipyards and had an idea. What if the shipyards could build a vessel faster than anyone had ever imagined? Not just for the sake of showing off, but to prove that mass production at this scale could be done without sacrificing quality. It was a gamble, one that could either make or break the entire operation. Bedford chose the 47th hull to attempt this audacious challenge. The ship would be named the SS Robert E. Peary, after the Arctic explorer. It was a ship that would push the limits of what was thought possible. Starting at midnight on November 8, 1942, over 1,000 workers would begin a marathon shift, determined to complete the ship in under 10 days. The goal was simple: build a ship in record time, but build it right. The workers, many of whom had never even considered that such a task was possible, rallied together in a way that was nothing short of miraculous. With Bedford overseeing the operation, the assembly line went into full force. Sections of the ship were prefabricated and pre-inspected, so by the time the keel touched the building way, the pieces were already ready to be put into place. The bow had been pre-assembled with all the necessary components: anchors, chain lockers, even crew quarters. The stern was complete, with the steering gear, propeller shaft, and other critical components already in place. And then, something incredible happened. 4 days into the process, the hull was complete. The engine was installed, the deck houses were positioned, the cargo holds were secured, and the steering gear was mounted. This wasn't just a milestone, it was a triumph of planning, efficiency, and determination. Every detail had been taken care of, from the tiniest bolts to the massive engine that would power the ship across the ocean. And then, on November 12th, just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after the keel had been laid, the SS Robert E. Peary slid into the waters of San Francisco Bay. A fully functional, fully operational ship, built in less than 5 days. And the most astonishing part? It wasn't just an empty hull. It was ready to be put to work. When the ship was officially delivered on November 15th, it had set a new record. Just 7 days, 14 hours, and 32 minutes from keel laying to full delivery. Imagine that. 7 days. That's less time than it takes to get a new car through an assembly line. And yet here was a fully operational ship, ready to serve in wartime, ready to help turn the tide of battle. For the skeptics, for the traditionalists, for the people who had said it couldn't be done, this was the moment they had to face reality. What they had considered impossible had just been achieved, and it wasn't a fluke. This was the new standard. This was the future. And the impact of this achievement didn't just stop at the shipyards. It rippled through the entire industry, shaking everything that had been thought to be true. Traditional shipbuilders who had mocked Kaiser and his methods began to send their engineers to Richmond, Oregon, and other shipyards to study what had been done. They saw the speed, they saw the efficiency, and they saw the quality, and they knew that their old ways were obsolete. For years, the industry had relied on slow, methodical methods of production, focusing on perfection over efficiency. But Kaiser's success had shown them that speed, combined with a focus on simplicity and repeatable processes, was the way forward. By early 1943, Kaiser's influence was spreading across the entire American shipbuilding industry. The 7 Kaiser shipyards were producing Liberty ships at an unbelievable pace. The yards were now constructing 490 ships, and the pace of production was accelerating. The impact of these innovations was felt beyond shipyards. The production techniques developed at Kaiser's yards would go on to shape industries all over the world, from automobile manufacturing to construction to aerospace. It's hard to overstate just how much this one industrial breakthrough would change the world. What started in the heart of wartime desperation would go on to fuel economic growth, change labor dynamics, and challenge the very foundation of what people thought was possible. By the time the war ended, Kaiser's methods had not only been adopted by the U.S. government, but they had reshaped entire industries. And yet the story doesn't end there. We're only just getting started, because the legacy of what Kaiser did didn't stop at the end of World War II. The methods, the systems, the belief that it was possible to accomplish the impossible, Those principles continued to ripple across industries and generations. And the question now is, what can we learn from Kaiser's story, not just about ships, but about how we approach challenges in our own lives? So stick around, because this is just the beginning. What happens next is a story of how a man's refusal to accept the impossible changed the very fabric of industry itself. It's a reminder that the greatest breakthroughs don't come from playing it safe, but from challenging everything you've been told about what's possible. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button now. You won't want to miss the rest of this journey into the heart of industrial innovation. Let's keep going. This story has only just begun. By 1943, Henry Kaiser's shipyards were no longer just an experiment in industrial innovation. They were the heartbeat of America's war effort. The Liberty ships, once seen as a last-ditch solution to the Allies' shipping crisis, had become symbols of American industrial power. Each day, more ships were launched, more supplies were delivered, and the war effort gained momentum. But as remarkable as it was to see these ships constructed in record time, the story doesn't stop there. The impact of what Kaiser had built went far beyond the immediate demands of World War II. What happened next would change the way the world thought about manufacturing, labor, and what could be accomplished when ordinary people were given the right tools and opportunities. Let's take a moment to put this into perspective. Kaiser's shipyards were now turning out Liberty ships at a staggering rate. By mid-1943, they were producing a new ship every 42 days on average. That's more than 2 ships per week. In total, over 2,700 Liberty ships were constructed in just 4 years, an amount that surpassed all the ships built in the entire previous century in the United States. That's an industrial feat so grand that it would be hard to replicate, even by today's standards. And it wasn't just about quantity, it was about quality too. Despite being built at lightning speed, these ships were seaworthy, durable, and capable of surviving the most brutal conditions the oceans could throw at them. Now you might be wondering, how could it be that something so enormous and complex could be built so quickly and efficiently? Well, here's where Kaiser's revolutionary approach to workforce management came into play. Unlike traditional shipyards, which were staffed by highly trained, specialized workers who had spent years learning their craft, Kaiser's shipyards recruited everyday people who had never welded a single piece of metal in their lives. In fact, fewer than 200 of the 10,000 workers Kaiser employed in his Richmond yard had any previous maritime experience. So how did this inexperienced workforce manage to produce ships faster than the best shipyards in the world? The answer lies in specialization. Rather than forcing workers to learn every aspect of shipbuilding, Kaiser's training programs focused on specific, repeatable tasks. A worker didn't need to become a master welder to build a ship. They just needed to learn how to weld a particular part of the ship, and they would do that same task over and over again. This was a radical departure from traditional shipbuilding, where workers were trained in a wide range of skills over many years. Kaiser's workers were trained quickly, sometimes in as little as 2 weeks, and then put to work immediately, performing tasks that they had been shown to do well. The result was a workforce that wasn't just efficient, it was incredibly productive. Think about it this way: when you specialize in a single task, you can perfect it. You can become faster, more efficient, and more confident with each repetition. And that's exactly what happened. The more experience the workers gained, the faster they got. By the spring of 1942, Kaiser's yards had already reduced the time it took to build a Liberty ship from an initial 197 days to just 70 days. This was the direct result of the simplified training and the specialized tasks. But Kaiser wasn't content to stop there. The race to build ships faster continued, and the competition between his shipyards pushed the limits of what was thought possible. The greatest demonstration of this came in the fall of 1942, when Kaiser's Portland yard set an unbelievable record. They built a Liberty ship in just 10 days. This was a level of productivity that left everyone in awe. Other yards, including the Richmond facility, were close on their heels, but Portland's feat seemed almost too good to be true. Yet it wasn't a fluke. It was a direct result of the system Kaiser had put in place. His workers weren't just building ships, they were building them faster than anyone could have imagined, and they were doing it with a level of quality that defied expectations. But as Kaiser's shipyards shattered one record after another, The question remained, would they be able to sustain this level of production over the long haul? After all, building a ship in 10 days is one thing, but could that kind of speed continue without compromising the quality of the ships? Would the workforce continue to perform at this high level, or would burnout set in? Kaiser had no doubt that the answer was yes. He had built a system that allowed workers to thrive, and he was determined to make sure that system was maintained. And then, just when it seemed like the production pace couldn't possibly get any faster, Kaiser took things one step further. He and his team proposed that they could not only build ships quickly, but that they could build them with incredible precision. This was the final test for his approach. Could a system built on speed and specialization maintain its integrity and deliver the quality required for wartime service? The answer came in the form of the SS Robert E. Peary. Built in just under 5 days, this ship was proof that not only could the process be fast, but it could also be done with remarkable accuracy and reliability. When the SS Robert E. Peary was launched, it wasn't just a triumph of speed, it was a triumph of strategy, planning, and logistics. The entire process had been carefully orchestrated to ensure that every part of the ship was ready before the assembly began. Prefabrication played a critical role in making this possible. Entire sections of the ship were pre-built in different parts of the yard, and when it was time to assemble the vessel, all the pieces were ready to go. This method of parallel production, where different sections of the ship were built simultaneously, was a major innovation that further boosted productivity and cut down on wasted time. The result was nothing short of miraculous. A fully operational ship, built in record time and delivered to the U.S. Navy in a matter of days, not months. This wasn't just some symbolic achievement, it was a practical, functional ship that would go on to serve in the war effort. The SS Robert E. Peary wasn't just an example of what could be done in record time. It was proof that innovation and determination could push the boundaries of what was possible. And as the war raged on, the impact of Kaiser's methods rippled across the world. As other shipyards adopted his methods, production rates soared. By 1944, the U.S. was launching 3 Liberty ships a day, 3 ships every single day, outpacing the enemy's ability to sink them. The scale of the operation was staggering, but it wasn't just the numbers that mattered. It was the fact that these ships, which had once taken months to build, were now being churned out faster than anyone thought possible. As incredible as this achievement was, it wasn't just about ships. Kaiser's methods had far-reaching implications for the entire industrial world. His approach to mass production, which focused on specialization, parallel production, and prefabrication, would go on to influence industries far beyond shipbuilding. The automotive industry, the construction industry, even the aerospace industry would adopt these same principles. What Kaiser had done wasn't just about ships. It was about changing the very way that industrial production was thought about and executed. And the story doesn't end with the war. Kaiser's innovations didn't fade away when the fighting stopped. In fact, they became the foundation for post-war manufacturing. The same principles that were used to build Liberty ships in record time would go on to revolutionize industries all over the world, and what started as a desperate need for wartime production would ultimately change the world's manufacturing landscape forever. So, as we look back on the incredible achievements of Henry Kaiser and his workers, it's important to remember that this wasn't just about building ships. It was about breaking barriers, pushing limits, and challenging everything we thought we knew about what was possible. Kaiser's story is one of innovation, determination, and the power of believing that impossible things can become possible when we're willing to think outside the box. If this story has inspired you even a little bit, imagine what we could achieve if we applied this mindset to our own challenges. And don't forget, if you want to hear more about how Kaiser's legacy changed the world, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You're not going to want to miss the next chapter in this incredible journey. The impact of this innovation is still felt today, and it's a reminder that when we challenge what's possible, we can truly change the world. Stay tuned because there's much more to come. As the war came to a close in 1945, many expected the shipbuilding boom to collapse. The Liberty ships, once essential to the war effort, would no longer be needed. Shipyards across the country would close. Workers would be laid off, and the factories that had once hummed with activity would fall silent. But what happened next would prove that Henry Kaiser's Industrial Revolution wasn't just a wartime miracle. It was the foundation for an entirely new way of thinking about manufacturing, labor, and production. The end of the war brought a shift in priorities. The demand for Liberty ships fell dramatically, and the shipyards, including Kaiser's, began to scale down operations. By December of 1945, Kaiser's workforce had shrunk from over 200,000 to fewer than 20,000. But despite the rapid reduction in production, the lessons learned during those critical years didn't vanish. The speed, efficiency, and innovation that Kaiser had introduced during the war didn't disappear when the fighting ended. Instead, they became the blueprint for future industrial endeavors. And here's where it gets interesting. Instead of falling into obscurity, the innovations introduced at Kaiser's shipyards would go on to shape industries around the world for decades. The techniques that Kaiser had pioneered, prefabrication, parallel production, simplified designs, and specialized training, would become the backbone of modern manufacturing. These ideas, which had once been seen as radical, were now adopted by industries far beyond shipbuilding. In the years that followed, countries like Japan and South Korea would study Kaiser's methods and use them as the foundation for rebuilding their own shipyards. The massive shipbuilding facilities that would later dominate global shipping construction, facilities in places like Ulan, South Korea, and Nagasaki, Japan, were direct descendants of the principles Kaiser had put into practice. His innovations didn't just change the way ships were built, they laid the groundwork for a new era of global industrial production. But it wasn't just shipbuilding that was impacted. The methods Kaiser used to train workers, to streamline production, and to make complex manufacturing tasks manageable for everyday people would go on to influence industries as diverse as automobile manufacturing, aerospace, and even construction. The system that Kaiser developed didn't just prove that massive quantities of ships could be built in record time. It proved that any industry could be transformed if it was willing to throw out old assumptions and embrace a new way of thinking about production. As the years passed, Kaiser's legacy grew. The workforce he had built, composed of women, minorities, and unskilled workers, had proven that with the right training and the right approach, ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things. By 1944, over 40,000 women were working in Kaiser's shipyards, and the integration of African American workers into skilled positions like welding and crane operation was far ahead of its time. The Liberty Ship program demonstrated that labor was not about relying on generational craftsmanship. It was about organizing people efficiently, training them quickly, and empowering them to take on tasks they might never have imagined they could do. And it wasn't just the workers who benefited from this transformation. Kaiser's approach to worker welfare also became a model for future industries. To take care of his workers, Kaiser established a system of prepaid health care that would eventually evolve into Kaiser Permanente, one of the largest and most successful health maintenance organizations in the country. This was another unexpected consequence of Kaiser's shipbuilding success, a system of health care that would benefit millions of Americans for generations to come. But perhaps the most profound impact of the Liberty Ship program was the psychological shift it created in the industrial world. Before Kaiser, manufacturing executives and engineers believed that certain limits were fixed. There were things that couldn't be done faster, cheaper, or more efficiently. But Kaiser showed that the real limits were often in our own minds. The Liberty Ship program demonstrated that, when necessity demanded it, industry could reinvent itself in a fraction of the time. In just 36 months, Kaiser's shipyards produced more ships than had been built in the entire previous century. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't just a wartime necessity. This was the future of manufacturing. Even as the war ended and shipyards began to wind down, the lesson of the Liberty ships continued to resonate. It wasn't about the ships themselves, but about the revolution they represented. The story of how ordinary people, given the right tools, training, and opportunities, could build extraordinary things, would inspire generations of workers, engineers, and entrepreneurs. It proved that with the right systems in place and with a willingness to challenge the status quo, anything was possible. In fact, the story of the Liberty ships continues to be a powerful lesson for us today. It's a reminder that the impossible isn't always impossible. Sometimes it's just a matter of rethinking the way we approach a problem, organizing our resources differently, and believing that we can achieve more than we've been told we can. Kaiser's success didn't come from trying to make things perfect. It came from realizing that good enough often beats perfect, especially when perfect means taking too long and missing the opportunity to get the job done when it's most needed. The Liberty ships themselves may no longer be in service, but their legacy endures. Some of these ships lasted far longer than anyone expected. The SS John W. Brown, for example, which was built in 1942, remains operational as a museum ship in Baltimore as of 2024, 82 years after it was built. The SS Jeremiah O'Brien, another Liberty ship, participated in the 50th anniversary commemoration of D-Day in 1994, sailing to Normandy under its own power after 50 years of service. These ships, built to last just 5 years, have proven to be far more resilient than anyone could have imagined. The impact of the Liberty ships extended far beyond their own service life. After the war, many of the ships were sold to foreign shipping companies, where they continued to operate well into the 1970s. The SS Albert Embo, the last Liberty ship built in 1945, was sold in 1964 and repurposed into a fish canning ship. It's still in use today as the landlocked headquarters of Trident Seafoods in Kodiak, Alaska. These ships, built in record time by an unskilled workforce, prove that with the right systems, even the most complex tasks could be accomplished in ways that defied expectations. And beyond the ships themselves, Kaiser's influence on American industry cannot be overstated. His approach to mass production, labor integration, and worker training would go on to shape countless industries for decades. The steel mills he built on the West Coast, the innovative healthcare programs he established, and the thousands of workers he trained during the war all contributed to the economic boom that followed in the post-war years. So, what's the takeaway from all of this? What can we learn from Kaiser's story? It's simple. Never underestimate what ordinary people can achieve when they're given the opportunity to do extraordinary things. Henry Kaiser didn't just build ships. He built a new way of thinking about manufacturing, a new way of thinking about workers, and a new way of thinking about what's possible. His legacy isn't just in the ships that sailed across the oceans. It's in the millions of people who saw what he accomplished and realized that they, too, could do the impossible. As you reflect on this incredible journey, take a moment to think about the challenges in your own life. What would happen if you stopped accepting the limitations you've been told exist? What if you reimagined the way you approach your own goals, your own work, or your own obstacles? The story of the Liberty ships is a testament to what happens when we break through those barriers and set our sights on something greater. If this story has inspired you, and you want to hear more about how innovation and determination have shaped the world we live in today, hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss the rest of these incredible tales of how ordinary people have achieved the extraordinary. Together, we can keep exploring these moments of history that remind us of the true power of human ingenuity.